Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show, Your Decision 2018. This is part two of our special two-part series with the Democratic nominee for Attorney General, Phil Weiser. Phil, great having you back.
It's great to be back, Aaron.
Okay, so we talked about the criminal justice system, a number of different issues in part one, opioids, marijuana. I want to know your position on the death penalty.
I believe Colorado should end its death penalty, and here's why. If you look back, we've not given the death penalty to many people. And we had a trial of James Holmes. My opponent led the trial. It cost us $6 to $12 million.
This was the Aurora Theater
The Aurora shooting, exactly.
It cost how much?
$6 to $12 million.
Cost taxpayers.
Cost taxpayers. The taxpayers paid a lot of money, and what that showed is that jurors don't want to give the death penalty. So here we are spending all this money for something that jurors don't want to do, and we could be spending that money on education. So I would end it. Now, here's the thing. As Attorney General, it's my job to defend and enforce the law. And if the death penalty is the law and there are appeals that come up from death penalty cases, I will handle them to the best of my ability. But if the legislature says to me, Phil, what should we do? My answer is, I think we've proven the death penalty doesn't make sense and we should end it.
You know, we touched on kind of health and welfare and safety tangentially in part one, but what do you think the Attorney General can do? What kind of leadership could you provide in truly protecting the health and welfare of Coloradans?
This is a really important role. We care about our public health, our safety and the environment here in Colorado. Clean air and clean water are fundamental to us. It's something we often take for granted, but it takes leadership and responsible oversight. Here in Colorado, we adopted a rule limiting methane emissions, which are harmful to human health and contribute to climate change. It was adopted by the industry and environmentalists working through what would be a sensible rule. When the EPA adopted our rule, what did our Attorney General do? Because we need that rule to EPA because 2/3 of the methane emissions that we breathe comes from surrounding states. She sued to stop that rule. Even though Colorado companies were following it, Colorado citizens wanted the clean air. That drove our governor crazy. I want to be an Attorney General who fights for clean air, who fights for clean water. And this is really important now because the EPA isn't acting always as an environmental protector. Scott Pruitt's gone, but his agenda lives on. That agency has sought to undo a lot of protections. It's critical to have an Attorney General protecting our air, protecting our water, and I'll stand up to protect public lands too.
All right, you mentioned the oil and gas industry. One of the challenges in Colorado environmentally is the number of orphaned wells. How do we address that issue where a company may have a number of different oil and gas wells that it has drilled, produced from, they may have extracted as much as they can from it. The company runs into financial trouble, especially given the volatility of the price of those commodities, oil and gas, may go bankrupt and leaves those wells behind as orphaned wells, potentially emitting methane, potentially creating all kinds of other problems. How do we seriously address that? And do you know how many orphaned wells there are in Colorado?
Your last question is a good trivia question, Aaron, and I couldn't begin to answer it. The answer is way too many. And let me double down on your question. We should talk also about abandoned mines, because abandoned mines are to water quality what orphaned wells are to air quality, which is a threat that we need to take seriously. As the lawyer for the state, for the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, it is crucial that we identify all the wells that we have, whether they're operating or not, and we have a way to inspect and evaluate whether they are safe. That's something that's crucial, and we need to make sure that we have the right oversight and then we have the right enforcement, because it's not enough only to have the right protections. We got to make sure we're enforcing those rules. I'll take that very seriously as Attorney General. Turns out the abandoned mines are even more complicated because there's certain rules that make it harder to clean up those mines. But I believe we in Colorado are collaborative and innovative, and we can work hard to avoid what happened in Durango in that Gold King mine disaster, where you really saw the river turn a weird color of orange. And that brought to focus, gosh, these abandoned mines can be a real challenge. So whether it's water quality or air quality, I want to be an Attorney General fighting for the right oversight and making sure we enforce our rules appropriately.
All right, well, there are thousands of abandoned wells, orphaned wells in the state. There are thousands of abandoned mines, many of which are leaching and leaking toxic materials into our streams. The Gold King mine incident was caused by a contractor hired by the EPA. It
Right.
wasn't the owner of the mine who caused that problem. So,
But it was an accident waiting to happen.
yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the steps that the Attorney General can do? What kind of legislation would you propose, for example, in the orphan well issue and the mines as well? You kind of have two sets of conditions chronologically. One is you have those orphaned wells, those abandoned mines that exist today and where finding a responsible party is very difficult.
Right.
So that's kind of one category. How do you address those? The second category is looking ahead. Right now, Colorado has relatively lax standards if you're doing mining, and of course if you're on federal land, then it involves the federal government, or if you're doing oil and gas exploration or production. Right now, if something happens, the kind of bonding that's done, the security that's offered really is nominal. How can you address that and provide leadership in both those areas?
Really, really important questions. First, we just passed some legislation on orphan wells, and the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission just adopting some rules on it. We need to work to implement those and oversee them and see if they're sufficient. Part of what we need to do is to get the current operators to all take collective responsibility for abandoned wells. And the oil and gas industry members that I've talked to, they get that point. They recognize a principle that is true both for mining and oil and gas operations, which is operators need a social license to operate. If the local communities can't trust their public health is being protected, they can't trust that it's safe, then we've got a big issue on our hands. And the job of the Attorney General is to work with those communities, with the relevant regulatory authorities, and with the industry to say we've got to come up with the right sets of protection. So I don't know if we've done enough yet on the orphan well problem. I will be looking at it and working to enforce what we've done, as well as see if we need to do more. On abandoned mines, you picked up something really important, which is the federal issue makes this complicated. We've got to work closely with the EPA on these issues. And we've got to figure out how we get people to take accountability to help clean up some of these sites and create the right incentives. And unfortunately, our current law is not our friend on this. If someone tries to take over a site, they become liable over everything on it. And so we've got to figure out how we fix that to create a path forward. I'm a big believer in innovation. We can figure our way through this. This is critically important, and it'll be a real priority for me as Attorney General.
Well, and I think it's important to point out there are certain oil and gas companies, certain energy companies who on their own initiative have gone and plugged wells, including wells they don't own,
Right.
As a service to the community. On the abandoned mine side, the liability issue is really significant because there are certainly mining companies and organizations who want to do something, but we've made it legally difficult for them to go into a site. If they had gone into Gold King with the intention of cleaning it up and something happened, they don't want to do that if they have the kind of liability which occurred.
This is a really important point, and what I want to do as Attorney General is to be always honest about what the issues are and how we work toward solutions. You're not going to hear a lot of sort of short, empty talking points. That's not my style. I want to figure out how do we solve this together, working with the federal government, working with communities. If we have to change the law, whether federally in the case of the mine issue or marijuana, I'll fight to do that. If we can fix the law here in Colorado, I'll work to do that too. If there are better regulations, we'll support them. The Attorney General's office has a lot of tools in the toolkit. Sometimes it's a case like against the opioid companies. Sometimes it's regulations like the abandoned wells. And sometimes you got to work for new legislation. It's all about remembering who you work for, which is the people of Colorado. It's protecting their rights, in this case, clean air and clean water. That's fundamental. If we can't do that, we can't have the Colorado that we all know and love.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with Phil to ask him some more questions in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
I'm Aaron Harbor, host of The Aaron Harbor Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today. I'm Aaron Harbor, host of The Aaron Harbor Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harbor Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harbor Show and keep hope alive.
I'm Aaron Harbor, host of The Aaron Harbor Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harbor Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. Remember, this is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Democratic nominee for Colorado's Attorney General position, Phil Weiser. Phil, so we just were talking about environmental issues. How about consumer protection? Because I've got to tell you, as someone who's been involved in that arena peripherally for many, many years, I'm astounded at the number of scams that not only occur, but don't seem to be prevented or addressed in a serious way. The number of elderly people who are constantly taken advantage of. I'm almost I know you're against capital punishment, but when I look at what some of these scammers do to people and how significantly it impacts the victims' lives, I'm kind of leaning towards the death penalty for some of these people. And of course, a lot of them are out of state, they're out of the country as well. What's your take on what the office can do better when it comes to consumer protection? Because I've got to tell you, I don't think this office, even historically, under any party administration, has done a good job in this arena.
Aaron, when I'm Attorney General, whether it's protecting our citizens' rights on the environment, as a consumer or as a citizen, their civil rights, we are going to take this office to a new level. We're going to remember every day we're working for the people of Colorado. So I've mentioned already the pharmaceutical companies, and you mentioned the death penalty. I won't go that far, but I will say this. Another Attorney General's called those pharmaceutical companies evil for their actions. That's not too strong a word. When you push a product knowing that it's highly addictive and you tell people the opposite, and their lives get destroyed, you don't get to walk away and cash your checks. You need to be held accountable. And that's the type of principle I'll bring to other areas. Now, while we're talking about pharmaceuticals, consider this case. Some of pharmaceutical companies, these are generic drug makers, used to charge $10 a bottle, but they got together and had a collusion, conspiracy. They're now charging $1,000 a bottle. That isn't legal under the antitrust laws. I will join other states and we will win money back for Colorado consumers who are being overcharged because of collusion. Also, you mentioned elderly. Elder abuse is a big problem. These scams target the elderly. I will create a special unit focusing on elder abuse to address what is a rising challenge, because a lot of elder members of our society might be a little more believing when they get a phone call. This is the IRS. We need to have all hands on deck addressing these issues. And finally, let me talk about younger people and student debt. This is something that's passionate for me. I was dean of CU Law School. We lowered average indebtedness by $16,000 per student when I was dean. When I'm Attorney General, we're not going to tolerate scams targeting people with student loan debt. Navient, a company that's done this, pushed people into bad plans for them, lying to people, knowing that people who had student debt are going to be worse off, but Navient got to make a quick buck. That's wrong. I'll go after them and hold them accountable.
All right, one of the areas that, of course, has exploded over the past decade is the use of the internet to defraud people. Of course, you have a background in the high-tech arena. Talk a little bit about how you would want to address that and your background as well.
I've been in the world of technology law for pretty much most of my career. So after I came here to Colorado to work for Judge David E. Bell back in 1994, I then went to work for Justice White and Justice Ginsburg on the U.S. Supreme Court. I went to the Justice Department to work on consumer protection, antitrust, and technology matters. And for the last 22 years, that's what I've done. I went back to the Justice Department again. I went to work for President Obama. I've led a center here in Colorado in law, technology, entrepreneurship, whether it's privacy, data security, or other forms of scams. This is an area I've worked on. I was actually President Obama's transition person for overseeing the Federal Trade Commission. We need leadership at our state level. Take, for example, Equifax. Equifax is a company collected information about all of us. We didn't ask them to do it, and they didn't do it properly.
This is one of the 3 major credit bureaus.
Correct. They collect all this information that helps people get loans, and what do they do with that information? They left it vulnerable, which now is enabling identity theft, which is the fastest growing crime. So we need to hold accountable anyone who has data, and they need to be responsible about what data they collect and how they store it. And if our federal government is not going to be on the case, we need our state AGs on the case, and I will be here in Colorado. Now, I believe not only in holding people accountable after the fact, but acting before the fact to give people guidance on best practice. Whatever industry you're in, say healthcare, for example, there can be a lot of these data breaches. Let's start talking to people. Guys, if you want to avoid being held accountable, you should be thinking about what sort of security you have to protect the data. And I'll work proactively to make sure that we in Colorado are a leader in this area.
Is there any reason Colorado could not require companies that operate here, whether they're based here or not, to encrypt personal data? So for example, I mean, I was one of the victims of the Target breach. I was a victim of the Equifax breach, and Lord knows what's happened with TransUnion and Experian, the other two companies as well. Could Colorado say, if any data you collect, personal data you collect on Colorado citizens has to be encrypted, number one, and number two, are we doing that for government entities from the state down here in Colorado with all the personal data that the state and other municipalities, counties, et cetera, agencies have?
Two great questions. Let me take the first one first. Colorado just passed a law actually on data protection and data security.
Right, I think Cole Wist
sponsored it, along with a number of
he did a great job on it.
Yeah, they worked really hard on it. So that law is going to affect. There'll be regulations under that law. It'll be enforced by the Attorney General's office. I'm going to see about making that law work. I don't know if that law specifically requires encryption of all data. That said, that is becoming best practice. And the Federal Trade Commission, which oversees data security issues through its Unfair Trade Practice Authority, has been pushing in that direction. So I will clearly espouse that as a best practice. And if companies are irresponsible with data under that law, they can be held accountable.
All right, and the concept, of course, if you encrypt data at a specific level, then someone who steals the data, as a rule, should not be able to actually get anything out of the files or the data that they find. That you would need a special code. Of course, there are people who can break through encrypted data, but it certainly makes it much, much more difficult if you do it right.
That's right. So that's the first point. Second point, how are we in Colorado doing? I don't know the answer to that. I will work with the Colorado Chief Information Officer on that very question to make sure Colorado is at best practice. Part of what I want to do as Attorney General, whether it's data security or employment practices, diversity, inclusiveness, how do we be a model in the state of Colorado for the whole state to do things at the level of best practice? Part of the power of government is the power to convene, whether it's on data security practices, whether it's on abandoned mines, or whether it's on how we handle employment. I want to set high standards, and I want to help spread those standards throughout the whole economy.
All right, last question on the issue of personal data. Often government agencies, state agencies, subdivisions below, collect data, personal data they do not need. Yes. I'll give you an example. If you're a victim of a crime, often the police department or the sheriff's department will ask for your birth date. As a victim, not the perpetrator, that becomes a public record potentially. And in terms of identity theft or anything else, you've now created a record with someone's full name, their legal name, their birth date, their address, etc. Why don't we have an effort to review what data government entities collect so that we can say, hey, if you don't need this information, for example, to solve a crime, right, why collect it?
You have just hit an incredibly important point about data security, which is stop and think. What data are we collecting and why? Too often, data gets collected because it can. Then it gets stored forever because it can. And then sometimes it's stored in a way that's insecure and it's vulnerable to being hacked. That is a big part of the problem. Part of the power to convene I'm mentioning in best practice would include just what you said. Let's talk to state and local governments and say, what are our practices and how do we raise our practice?
All right, I know we're running out of time. We ran out of time for this segment, but how about the big companies, the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, that I think most citizens don't realize collect far more data about us than government entities?
This is something that people need to know about the Attorney General job. Because you have this authority, in our case, our data protection law, you can go to these companies and say, guys, if you want to be in compliance, we need to know what sort of practices you're doing. And you need to tell us, hey, we're doing these practices, and make a commitment with, back to some platforms, so mobile interactive platforms. When Kamala Harris was Attorney General in California, she did that. And that's something that industry often says, help us figure out best practice. And we will do it. And others may not want to do it, but you can shame them into doing it. That's part of what being a great AG for the people of Colorado entails.
All right, data shaming. We have a
There
new,
you go.
We have a new term. All right, we're going to take our last break, and we'll be back to wrap up with Phil Weiser.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
I'm Aaron Harbor, host of The Aaron Harbor Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harbor. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harbor Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harbor Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harbor Show and Keep Hope Alive.
The Aaron Harbor Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. Remember again, this is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Phil Weiser, and this is going to be the lightning round since we're running out of time.
All right.
Child abuse. I've been stunned at the number of stories I've read over the years of how the state has failed our children, where different agencies are making mistakes, where sometimes reports have come in of abuse. The agency locally or statewide doesn't do anything. A child is injured or even killed. We've had issues related to youth corrections with some efforts made obviously to correct them, but it seems like every year we're finding out we're failing our kids. What can we do about this? What kind of leadership can the Attorney General provide?
There are requirements for any time the state is involved, foster care, for example, supervised corrections, that kids be treated fairly and decently. And what you're talking about is obviously awful and has huge effect on people's lives, the trauma that gets inflicted. So we need to insist that we follow the best standards we can, and when people act in ways that are pedophiles, wherever the context is, they need to be held accountable. And we need to learn from how did this happen, how do we stop it from happening again?
All right, gun violence, certainly gun violence, gun safety is a perennial issue in Colorado. We seem to have a disproportionate number of incidents. Certainly we have major incidents in terms of the national attention they get. What can we do to address this challenge?
We in Colorado passed a law that protects us. If you can't pass a background check, you should not get a weapon. We also limit the size of magazines so that the capacity level isn't like what James Holmes had walking into that movie theater. We need an Attorney General to defend and enforce our law. We also have to improve it. The red flag law would keep weapons out of the hands of people who are dangerous to themselves or others, and a bump stock ban would prevent weapons from being turned into weapons of war. That's what I'm going to work on as Attorney General. I also want to work on safe gun storage, because sometimes a gun gets taken by a kid and then terrible things can happen, including suicide. So we need to be smart about how guns are stored. There's a lot of work to do on this. I'm proud to be a Moms Demand Action candidate supported by Colorado Ceasefire. I will fight hard to protect our kids on gun safety matters.
What would be the structure of an effective red flag law, and why is there so much opposition to it?
The opposition is because the NRA is so powerful, and the NRA's view is we're not going to give up on anything. We're not going to allow any reasonable protections, and that's their position. I find that unfortunate. I find it really unfortunate that our state Senate didn't pass the red flag law. You mentioned Cole Wist earlier. He worked on that law along with Alec Garnett and others. The idea
Cole is, of course, Republican.
Alec is a Democrat. That's right. It was a bipartisan initiative. And it's something that George Brocco and I agree on. George is not for our background check law, he's not for bump stocks, but he does believe in the red flag law. And that's important because the red flag law says if a court, and this is a key piece of it, a court can find that you're a danger to yourself or others, we're going to take away your guns as long as you're a danger. And in California, they have...
And the assumption is it's temporary
Yes.
as long as you come back and you're okay.
Yes, and in California they have such a law. It's estimated for every 10 red flag orders, called gun restraining orders, it saves a life.
All right, last question, the American legal system. I actually have a bunch of questions about that. I know I'm running out of time. But when it comes to equal treatment under the law, equal protection under the law, what can you as Attorney General do? Because I know many people in the country and in our state don't feel that they have the same privileges and protection that people with wealth, for example, have.
This is so deeply personal to me and a core of why I became a lawyer, working for Ruth Bader Ginsburg and running to be your Attorney General. My family came here after surviving the Holocaust, and they came here because this country provides freedom and opportunity to everybody, no matter who you are, what you look like. Our Attorney General decides on a range of issues, whether it's protecting women's rights, right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, whether it's protecting people of sexual orientation or different gender identity to not be discriminated against. We need an Attorney General committed to this principle, equal justice under law for everyone, no matter who you love, what you look like, where you live. I'm deeply committed to that principle.
All right, well, certainly many Coloradans, many American citizens don't feel that the law is applied equally. And I think many of us feel that if you're wealthy, you have a huge advantage. How do what can you do to address that challenge and so that people see the law operating fairly, evenly, and not based on your social or financial or economic status?
We talked earlier about cash bail as a powerful example of what you just said. We've got to fix cash bail so it doesn't work in favor only of the wealthy and hurt poor people. We've got to worry about access to justice. It's a big issue here in Colorado. We need to approach it with a mindset of innovation and problem solving. A lot of people who, let's say, are getting divorced, they don't have lawyers. And so they might decide, I can't get divorced, or they don't do it the right and smart way. We need to find solutions to give people access to legal representation. This is something that's really important. We have a growing disparity in wealth in this country, and if you're being evicted or you're facing a legal proceeding and no one's on your side, it's a big problem. In many of these cases, as the lawyer for the people of Colorado, say it's for consumers being cheated, the AG's office can help. In other cases, the AG's office needs to be a leader, working in our legal community to make sure that everyone can be represented fairly. This is a big, important issue. I believe in equal justice for all and fairness, and I'm going to work hard on those issues as Attorney General.
All right. When it comes to the perception, last question, of lawyers in this country, you've heard hundreds, if not thousands, of lawyer jokes. Why do so many people in America have such a negative view of the legal system, and especially of lawyers, including at times their own lawyer?
People might think the legal system is only a game, that the rules work for those who are most wealthy and can afford it. I understand that concern. But let me say something else about the legal system. The rule of law that protects property rights, no matter who you are, that protects your civil rights, that protects our democracy, it's the foundation of our government. And part of what people need to know about this moment is attacks on the rule of law that we see by our federal government, not enforcing the Affordable Care Act, for example. Those attacks are an opportunity for us to shut them down and to recommit to the rule of law. The way we do that here in Colorado, elect me as Attorney General. I'll protect everyone's legal rights. I'll stand up for the rule of law and protect the values that this country is based on.
All right, Phil, thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
All right, that was Phil Weiser, the Democratic nominee for Colorado's next Attorney General. Make sure you watch part 1 of this special 2-part series. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.